My name is Darian Voss. I'm 26 years old, and for the last 8 years, I have worked as a ledger keeper and general dog's body in Bronick's General Store tucked into the southern market quarter of Ravenhold. The city sits on the edge of the human kingdoms, where the trade roads meet the northern hills still claimed by orc clans. It is not a grand place, no marble fountains or royal guards, but it is loud enough during the day that a quiet man can disappear inside the noise of wagons, haggling voices, and the clink of copper coins. My days are the same. I weigh salt and flour record debts, and a thick, leather-bound book stack barrels of dried beans sweep the floorboards at closing and slide the heavy oak beam across the door each night. Old Brannock pays me enough to keep a small rented room above the bakery 2 streets away and to eat 1 hot meal a day. It is not much, but it is steady. Most evenings I tell myself that steady is enough. I have no family left in Ravenhold. My parents died of fever when I was 17, and I never learned how to want more than this simple rhythm. That night, however, the rhythm broke. The storm came without warning. The sky had been heavy all afternoon, but when the first thunder cracked, it sounded like the mountain itself had split open. Rain slammed against the shutters so hard the oil lamp on the counter flickered. I was finishing the last entry in the ledger when the wind howled down the alley and rattled the door like something alive trying to get inside. I set the quill down, pulled on my patched wool cloak, and stepped out to bar the door for the night. That was when I heard the scream. It cut through the rain, sharp-pained, not the cry of a drunk or a thief. It came from the narrow passage beside the salt warehouse, where the stone paving always turned treacherous in bad weather. I did not think. I simply grabbed the lantern from its hook and ran. The wind nearly tore the cloak from my shoulders. Rain stung my eyes. Under the weak yellow glow of the gate lantern, I saw her. She was sitting on the wet stones, back pressed to the warehouse wall, one hand clamped around her left ankle. Her dark hair, streaked with greenish-black, clung to her face in wet ropes. An orc, young, maybe 22, with the deep green skin of the northern hill clans and the strong shoulders of someone used to hard labor. Her simple wool dress was soaked through the hem torn, and a long scrape ran down her calf where she had slid across the stones. I knelt without thinking. "Are you hurt?" I asked. She lifted her head. Her eyes were amber bright even in the storm, and they narrowed at me with a mixture of pain and suspicion. "If you have to ask after looking at me, then I must be fine," she said through gritted teeth. I almost smiled despite everything. "Let me try again. Is your ankle broken?" "Not broken," she muttered. "Just twisted." I slipped. I glanced around. The square was empty. No one else had come out in this weather. "You're not from the market, are you?" "I don't recognize you, then tonight is the first time you've seen me." Rain poured down harder. She was shivering. Even orcs feel the cold when they are wet and injured. "My name is Darian," I said. "I work in the store right there. There's a small guard room inside with a brazier and a medicine chest. Let me help you inside before that ankle swells worse." She studied me for a long moment. Orcs in Ravenhold are used to wary glances, muttered insults, doors closing a little too quickly. I could see the calculation in her eyes, trust or run. "I'm not going to rob you," I added quietly. "And if you were planning to rob me, you picked a bad night for it." A short surprised breath left her almost a laugh. She nodded once. I slipped an arm around her waist. She was taller than I expected, solid with muscle, but when she tried to stand, her injured leg buckled. I took most of her weight as we limped the short distance to the guardroom behind the store. The door groaned when I pushed it open. Inside, the brazier still held a few red coals. I set the lantern on the table and eased her onto the wooden bench. She leaned back against the wall, breathing hard. I opened the medicine chest Brannock kept for the porters who twisted ankles, hauling barrels, clean rags, a jar of salve, and strips of linen. I poured a little water from the kettle into a basin and knelt in front of her. "I need to clean it first," I said. She turned her face away. "Do what you have to." My fingers were careful. The skin around her ankle was already darkening to purple. She flinched once when I touched the swollen joint, but she did not pull away. Outside, the storm roared like a living thing shaking the shutters. When the bandage was secure, she let out a long breath and looked at me properly for the first time without the wall of suspicion. "I'm Maela," she said. I nodded. "All right, Maela. That ankle isn't broken, but you won't be walking far tonight." She stared at the closed door, where rain still hammered against the wood. "I know." The brazier crackled. The small room felt suddenly smaller, the air warmer. I had come out into the storm to close a shop, and instead I had carried an injured orc girl inside, wrapped her ankle, and listened to the rain with her. At that moment, I did not know that the storm had only begun, or that this single night of rain would pull me into her life just as surely as it had pulled her into mine. After the bandage was tied, I thought the night's strange kindness would end there. I would help Maela to the door, watch her limp away into the rain, and return to my ledger and my quiet room above the bakery. Simple. Safe. The way my life had always been. But when she stood up from the bench, her weight shifted, and her injured leg buckled before she had taken 3 steps. I caught her around the waist just in time, her shoulder pressing hard against my chest. The scent of wet wool and rain-soaked skin filled my nose. "Not good," I said. "You can't walk far like this." She clenched her jaw, stubborn pride flashing in those amber eyes. "I don't like troubling strangers. I think the storm already decided that for both of us." She looked at me for a long second, then gave a small, tired nod. There was a healer's house, 2 streets over the Silver Oak Hospice run by old Heron. It stayed open all night for travelers and the poor. I told her I would take her there. She did not argue this time. I found an old oilskin cloak for her and held the lantern high as we stepped back into the rain. It had eased to a steady drizzle, but the streets were still rivers of black water. Maela leaned on me heavily, one arm around my shoulders, her breath warm against my ear every time her ankle twinged. She was taller than me, strong-boned, yet right then she felt fragile in a way that made my chest tighten. At the healer's door, warm lamplight spilled across the wet stones. Heron, an old man with a white beard and steady hands, took one look at her ankle and ushered us inside. While Maela sat behind the linen screen for a proper wrapping, I counted out the coins from my week's wages onto the scarred wooden table. It was most of what I had left after rent, and the debt I still owed Bronick for flour. Haran glanced at the silver but said nothing. He knew the look of someone giving more than they could spare. I waited on the bench in the front room, cloak dripping onto the floorboards. My mind kept circling back to the way Maela had flinched when my fingers brushed her skin earlier, not from pain alone, but from surprise that anyone would touch her gently. Orcs in Ravenhold learned early that kindness often came with a price. When she stepped out again, the new bandage was neat and tight, and a thick wool shawl lay across her shoulders. She moved better, but she still limped. The rain outside had softened to little more than mist. "Thank you," she said quietly once we stood under the hospice awning. "It's nothing." "It isn't nothing." She hesitated, then stepped closer and wrapped her arms around me in a sudden fierce hug. I froze. Her body was solid and warm against mine, her wet hair brushing my cheek. She held on like someone who had not been held in a very long time. My hands hovered awkwardly before I let one rest lightly on her back. "You didn't have to stay," she whispered against my shoulder. "But you did. I don't like leaving anyone alone in a storm like that." A gust of wind whipped under the awning and tugged at the edge of her shawl. It slipped from her shoulder, exposing a strip of green skin and the curve of her collarbone. She gasped and snatched at the fabric, pulling it closed. Her cheeks darkened to a deeper shade of green. Her eyes met mine, wide with something between embarrassment and mischief. You saw everything she said, voice low but carrying a dangerous lilt. Now you have to take responsibility." My face went hot so fast I thought the rain might steam off my skin. I only put salve on your ankle, I swear." The words tumbled out before I could stop them. I sounded like a complete fool. Maela stared at me for half a heartbeat, then burst out laughing. Not the short-guarded breath from earlier, but a real bright laugh that shook her shoulders and echoed under the awning. She had to grab the post to steady herself, eyes shining with tears of mirth. "I was only teasing," she managed between gasps. "Gods above, your face. I rubbed the back of my neck cheek still burning. That wasn't funny. It was the funniest thing I've seen in months. She wiped her eyes, still smiling, and for the first time that night, the hardness around her softened completely. The guarded orc, who had hissed at me in the rain, was gone. In her place stood a young woman who could laugh at herself at me at the absurdity of the whole evening. The drizzle fell softly around us. Somewhere down the street a late cart rumbled past wheels splashing through puddles. I should have felt awkward standing there with a stranger, an orc stranger, after she had just hugged me and teased me into blushing like a boy. Instead, I felt something quieter, warmer, like the storm had blown a door open I hadn't known was closed. Mila straightened, pulling the shawl tighter. Her amber eyes studied me again, but this time there was no suspicion in them. "Darian," she said, using my name like it already fit in her mouth. "Thank you." "Really?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without sounding foolish again. She took a careful step, testing her ankle, then looked back at me. "I think I can make it from here." I knew she couldn't. Not really. Not through the dark, wet streets with that limp. But I also knew how much it cost her to accept help. "I'll walk you as far as the corner," I offered. Just to be sure. She didn't argue this time. Instead, she held out her arm and I took it. We moved slowly together under the misty rain, her shoulder brushing mine with every step. I still did not know her story. I did not know why an orc girl was alone in the southern market at night or what had brought her to slip and fall outside my shop. All I knew was that the simple rhythm of my life had cracked open, and through that crack, something new and unexpected had stepped in. And for the first time in years, I was not in any hurry to close it again. After the laughter faded, a different kind of silence settled between us. Not awkward, but soft. Like the rain itself had decided to give us a moment of peace. The drizzle fell in gentle threads, now turning the stones of the square into mirrors that reflected the golden light from the hospice windows. Far down the street, a lone cart rumbled past its wheels, splashing through puddles, and the bell in the watchtower told the third watch. Ravenhold was never truly quiet, but at this hour it felt close enough. Mila sat down on the wide stone step beneath the awning, careful with her bandaged ankle. She pulled the thick shawl tighter around her shoulders. I hesitated, then sat a respectful distance away, close enough to share the shelter, but not so close that she might feel crowded. The night air smelled of wet stone and distant wood smoke. "Darian," she said, using my name again like it already belonged to her. "I'm here." Today was the worst day of my life. Her voice was quiet, stripped of the teasing spark from moments earlier. She stared out into the misty square, amber eyes reflecting the lantern light. "I lost my job at the dye workshop this morning," she continued. "The mistress said trade was slow and they didn't need extra hands. But I heard the real reason. A wealthy merchant from the southern cities came in, saw an orc working the vats, and told her he would take his business elsewhere if my kind remained on the premises." She gave a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. "So I was gone before noon." I kept still letting her speak. I told myself it was only work. I could find another. But when I reached my lodging, the landlady was waiting with a notice, 2 weeks behind on rent. She gave me until sunset to leave. Mila's fingers tightened on the edge of the shawl. I spent the afternoon walking the market trying to sell the last thing I had left from my mother, a small silver bracelet she wore the day she died. The pawnbroker offered half what it was worth. I walked away rather than let it go for so little. She drew a slow breath as if the memory still hurt to swallow. By the time the storm broke, I had nowhere to go, nothing left, and a twisted ankle that made every step feel like punishment. "I slipped on the stones behind your warehouse. When I fell, I thought, this is it. This is where it ends. No one will even notice." Her gaze finally turned to me. "And then you appeared. You didn't ask who I was. You didn't ask what I could give you in return. You simply helped. You carried me inside, cleaned my wound, paid for a healer you could barely afford, and stayed when you had every reason to leave." She shook her head slowly. "You have no idea how rare that is for someone like me. I looked down at my hands, rain still dripping from my sleeves onto the stone. I don't think kindness should be rare. But it is, she said, especially for an orc in a human city. Most people see the green skin and the tusks first. They decide I'm trouble before I open my mouth. You looked at me and saw a person who needed help. The words landed heavily between us. I had lived my whole life thinking my small axe, carrying a crate for an old dwarf, extending credit to a widow, barely mattered. Sitting here listening to Mila, I understood for the first time that sometimes the smallest kindness is the only light someone has left. Tonight isn't the end, I said quietly. You lost your job. You lost your room. Your ankle is hurt. Everything feels terrible right now, but you're still here. You're still breathing. You can stand up tomorrow morning. As long as that's true, the road isn't finished. She was silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick. You saved me tonight, Darian. Not just the ankle. She cut me off gently. You reminded me the world hasn't gone completely rotten. There are still people who stay. I didn't know what to say to that. My throat felt tight. So I simply sat beside her while the drizzle whispered against the awning and the city breathed around us. After a while, she stood testing her weight. I can't stay here all night. You can use the storage room behind the shop, I offered again. It's dry. There's an old straw mattress and blankets. It's not much, but it's warm, and no one will bother you until morning. This time she didn't refuse. She only nodded. We walked back slowly through the quiet streets. I kept the lantern low so she could see the puddles. When we reached the back door of the shop, I unlocked it and let her inside. The small storage room smelled of grain and beeswax. I lit the brazier, laid out the cleanest blanket I could find, and set a wrapped piece of bread and a cup of water on a crate beside the mattress. You take the room, I told her. I'll sleep in the guard chair outside. Mila looked at the simple bed I had made for her, then at me. For a moment I thought she might argue again, but instead she said softly, "Thank you. For staying." I closed the door behind me and settled into the old wooden chair in the guard room. The brazier's glow seeped under the door, and I could hear the faint rustle of her moving inside. Outside, the rain had almost stopped. The storm that had upended both our nights was passing. I leaned my head back against the wall and closed my eyes. I still knew almost nothing about the orc girl sleeping on the other side of that door. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty: tonight had changed something. And whatever came tomorrow, I wasn't ready to let it end here. The next morning the sky was a clear, impossible blue, as if the storm had never existed. I opened the shop at first light, moving through the familiar motions, unlocking shutters, sweeping the threshold, setting out the scales. But my mind was not on the barrels of salt or the ledger waiting on the counter. It kept returning to the orc girl asleep in the storage room behind the shop. When Brannick arrived, shuffling in with his usual grumble about old bones and wet weather, I told him everything. Not the whole story, just the important parts: the storm, the injured orc, the healer's bill I had paid, and the fact that she had nowhere to go. He listened without interrupting, rubbing his white stubbled chin. If the girl can read, write, and count without losing a single copper, he said at last, I could use help with the afternoon ledger. My eyes aren't what they used to be. But mind you, some customers will complain. Orc behind the counter. They'll call it bad for business. I don't care what they call it, I answered. Brannick studied me for a long moment, then gave a short nod. You never do. Tell her to come see me after midday. I carried a small loaf of bread and a bowl of warm porridge into the storage room. Maela was already awake, sitting on the edge of the straw mattress, combing her damp hair with her fingers. The bandage on her ankle looked less swollen in the daylight. I spoke with the owner. I said, setting the food down, "There's a job here if you wanted afternoon ledger and stocking shelves. It's not much pay, but it's steady, and you'd have a dry place to sleep until you find something better." She looked up slowly, amber eyes wide. "You're serious?" "I'm serious." For a moment she didn't speak. Then she gave a small, shaky laugh. "Yesterday I had nothing. Today a stranger offers me work and a roof. I don't know whether to thank you or ask what you want in return." Nothing, I said. Just Try it. If it doesn't suit you, you can walk away any time." She stared at the bowl of porridge like it might vanish if she blinked. "I'll try." That was how it began. The first weeks were hard. A few customers muttered when they saw an orc behind the counter. One merchant refused to let her weigh his grain and demanded I do it instead. Maela never argued. She simply worked harder, her handwriting neat and careful in the ledger, her hands quick and sure when she measured herbs or rolled bolts of cloth. She learned the prices faster than I had. Within 10 days, even the grumblers started to notice that their orders were never short and their change was always exact. Brunek watched her with growing approval. "Girl's got a head for numbers," he told me one evening, "and she doesn't waste time chatting with the idle ones." I said nothing, but every afternoon I found myself glancing toward the counter whenever the bell rang, waiting for the low, steady sound of her voice answering customers. Our evenings became a quiet ritual. After closing, we swept the floor together, wiped the scales, and stacked the empty crates. Then we would sit on the back step with whatever was left from the day-stale bread, a wedge of cheese, sometimes a few apples Brunek let us take. We talked about small things at first, the price of salt this season, which dwarf clans bought the most lamp oil, how the rain had changed the color of the river. Slowly the conversations grew deeper. One night, while the last light of sunset painted the rooftops gold, Mila told me why she had left her clan 3 years earlier. "My mother died in the last border skirmish," she said, voice soft. "After that, the elders decided the only future for a young orc woman was to marry a warrior and bear strong sons for the next war. I wanted to learn letters, to read the old songs instead of just singing them. They called it foolish." She looked down at her hands, so I walked away with nothing but the clothes on my back and my mother's bracelet. I thought Ravenhold might give me a chance to be something besides a weapon or a wife. She glanced at me. "Most days I still wonder if I was wrong." "You weren't," I said. "You're here. You're working. You're learning." "That's not nothing." Mila smiled, and the kind of smile that reached her eyes and made the green of her skin seem warmer. "You always say things like that. Like the world is simpler than it feels. Maybe it is sometimes." 3 months passed like that, quiet, steady, and full of small moments I began to look forward to more than I wanted to admit. I noticed the way she tucked a stray lock of hair behind one tusk when she was concentrating on the ledger, the low, warm sound of her laugh when a child tried to bargain for an extra piece of candy, the way her shoulder would brush mine accidentally while we restocked the top shelves and neither of us would move away right away. I also noticed how often I caught myself thinking about her after I had locked the shop and walked home, how the small room above the bakery felt emptier than it used to. One golden afternoon near the end of the 3rd month, Mila stepped through the front door wearing a new deep green wool dress that fit her perfectly. Her ankle was completely healed. Her hair was braided neatly, and on her wrist was a simple copper band I had never seen before. She stopped in the middle of the shop, hands on her hips, and looked at me with an expression so serious I thought something was wrong. "I have news," she announced. I set down the sack of beans I was carrying. "Good or bad?" "Good." She smiled bright and sudden. "Master Heron at the Silver Oak Hospice offered me a permanent position keeping their records and helping with medicines. Proper wages. A room in the hospice attic if I want it." My stomach did a strange little drop, half joy, half something sharper. That's wonderful, Mela. You deserve it. I know." She stepped closer, her eyes never leaving mine. "But I didn't come just to tell you that." She reached into the pocket of her dress and took out a small cloth pouch. Inside were the exact coins I had paid for her healer's visit the night of the storm every copper returned. Tucked with them was a folded note in her careful handwriting. I opened it. "You helped me when you owed me nothing. Now I want to stand beside you on equal ground, not because I must, but because I choose to. Thank you, Darian, for seeing me that night when the storm tried to wash everything away." I looked up. Maela was watching me, waiting. "I thought you had forgotten that night," I said. "I never forgot." She took one more step close enough that I could smell the faint scent of herbs and clean wool on her. "And now, It's time for you to take responsibility. Properly. My heart beat loud in my ears. What does that mean? She held out her hand. Have dinner with me tonight, not as the man who bandaged my ankle, as the man who stayed. I looked at her open palm, then at her amber eyes that no longer carried the shadow of that first terrible night. They held something new, hope, warmth, and a quiet invitation. I slid my hand into hers. All right, I said, but I warn you, I still only know how to put salve on wounds. Mila laughed, the sound bright and free in the quiet shop. And in that moment, with her fingers warm around mine and the afternoon sun slanting through the windows, I understood that the storm had not merely brought her to my door. It had quietly opened a new door for both of us. One we could walk through together if we chose. 3 months passed faster than rain running down a roof. Mila became part of the shop the way morning light becomes part of a room, quietly, steadily, until you cannot imagine the space without her. She kept the ledger cleaner than I ever had remembered, which customer liked their salt measured in even handfuls, and taught the youngest delivery boys how to tie a proper knot on a sack so it would not spill on the way home. Brannick stopped complaining about his eyes and started complaining that he should have hired her sooner. Even the grumbling customers grew fewer. Some still muttered, but most simply nodded when she handed them their change and said, "Thank you, Mayela," like it was the most natural thing in the world. I noticed everything. The way she hummed an old Orc Hill song under her breath while stacking jars of honey. The small copper band she now wore on her wrist that caught the afternoon light. The way her shoulder would brush mine when we both reached for the same crate and neither of us moved away for a heartbeat longer than necessary. I started waking up earlier just so I could open the shutters before she arrived and see her walking down the street with that steady, determined stride. I also started to feel something I had no name for yet. A warmth that settled behind my ribs whenever she laughed at one of my clumsy jokes. A quiet ache when she left at the end of the day and the shop felt too large and too empty. Then one golden afternoon, 3 months to the day after the storm, Mila stepped through the front door wearing a new deep green wool dress that fit her like it had been made for her shoulders. Her ankle was completely healed. Her black hair, streaked with that faint greenish sheen, was braided neatly and pinned with a simple wooden comb. On her wrist, the copper band gleamed. She stopped in the middle of the shop, hands on her hips, and looked straight at me with an expression so serious, my stomach tightened. "I have news," she said. I set down the sack of beans I was carrying. Good or bad, good. A smile broke across her face, bright and sudden, the kind that made the whole room feel warmer. Master Heron at the Silver Oak Hospice offered me a permanent position, keeping records, mixing medicines, helping with the night shift when needed. Proper wages, a small room in the attic if I wanted. For a second I could not speak. Joy for her rose first, sharp and genuine. Then something quieter followed, a small, hollow tug behind my ribs. That's wonderful, Mayela. You deserve it. More than deserve it. I know, she said, stepping closer. But I didn't come just to tell you that. She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a small cloth pouch. When she opened it on the counter, I saw every single coin I had paid for her healer's visit the night of the storm, every copper returned exactly as I had given it. Tucked beneath the coins was a folded note in her careful, slightly slanted handwriting. I opened it. You helped me when you owed me nothing. Now I want to stand beside you on equal ground, not because I must repay a debt, but because I choose to. Thank you, Darian, for seeing me that night when the storm tried to wash everything away. I looked up. Mayela was watching me, amber eyes steady and warm. I thought you had forgotten that night, I said, voice rougher than I intended. I never forgot. She took one more step until only the width of the counter separated us. And now it's time for you to take responsibility. Properly this time. My heart beat loud in my ears. What does that mean? She held out her hand, palm up, a strong green fingers open and waiting. Have dinner with me tonight. Not as the man who bandaged my ankle, not as the man who gave me a job, as the man who stayed, as Darian. The shop was quiet except for the soft creak of the floorboards and the distant sound of a cart rolling past outside. I looked at her hand, then at her eyes. There was no shadow left in them from that terrible night. No fear, no guarded wall, only hope, warmth, and a quiet question she was finally brave enough to ask. I reached across the counter and slid my hand into hers. Her fingers closed around mine, warm and sure. "All right," I said. "But I warn you, I still only know how to put salve on wounds and sweep floors." Mila laughed, the sound bright and free, filling the shop like sunlight after rain. She squeezed my hand once, then let go, but the warmth stayed. We closed the shop together that evening side by side, as we had done so many times before. Only this time, when the last shutter was locked and the key turned, she did not head toward the hospice. She waited for me under the lantern by the door, the same lantern that had lit her face the night we met. We walked slowly through the streets of Ravenhold as the sky turned soft rose and gold. She told me about the new room at the hospice, the herbs she would learn to mix, the old songs she wanted to teach the children who came for treatment. I told her about the dream I had never spoken aloud before a small shop of my own one day. Not grand, just warm enough that anyone who stepped inside, human or orc or dwarf, would feel they belonged for a while. She listened the way she always did, like every word mattered. At the edge of the market square, where the first stars were beginning to show, she stopped and turned to face me. "Darian," she said, voice soft but certain. "That night in the rain, I thought my life had ended. You showed me it had only changed direction. I want to keep walking that new direction with you, if you'll have me." I looked at her, at the orc woman who had once been a stranger shivering in the storm, now standing tall and steady in the twilight. The woman who had laughed at my red face, who had worked harder than anyone, who had returned every coin not out of obligation but out of choice. I took her hand again. "I'll have you," I said. "Tonight. Tomorrow. For as many nights as you'll let me." Mila smiled the kind of smile that made the whole world feel possible. She leaned in and rested her forehead gently against mine for a moment, tusks brushing my cheek, warm breath mingling with the evening air. "Then let's start with dinner," she whispered. We walked on together, hand in hand, through the streets of Ravenhold as the lanterns flickered to life one by one. I still did not know what tomorrow would bring. I did not know if the city would always accept us, or if there would be harder days ahead. But I knew one thing with perfect clarity. Sometimes, fate does not arrive with grand battles or ancient prophecies. Sometimes it arrives with a storm, a twisted ankle, a teasing joke that makes you blush like a fool, and one small, stubborn act of kindness on a rain-soaked night. And sometimes that is more than enough to change two lives forever. I looked at Mila beside me, her fingers warm in mine, and for the first time in my quiet, ordinary life, I understood this was not the end of anything. It was only the beginning.